Whether it's basketball or football, benching Jalen's in Houston is a theme. How can we get around Jalen Pitre being benched? A new role for DP Damian Pierce. And Jimmy Ward is done for the season, but Houston brings home a familiar face.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Wednesday's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you to our first-time listeners and viewers out there. If this is your first time, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. To all of our returning listeners, lending your ear for another episode as Cody and I talk Texans. Thank you for coming back. I'm your Texans football analyst, John, some sports guy Hickman. Of course, as always, on the other side of the screen, my man, Sports Illustrated's own credential media member for the city of Houston. It seems like Rockets, Texans, and if you want Saber Cats, the rugby team. Do you do anybody? U of H at one point?
Yeah,
TSU back in the day.
We did HBCU at one time. We did Rice. We did it all, man.
We did it all here in the city of Houston. HBU, we did do HBU. Got credential there. But we are here to talk Texans, right? We're looking at Jimmy Ward. He's out for the season. Kareem Jackson is back here in Houston, so we'll talk about that. The new role for Damian Pierce on special teams and Jalen Pitre being benched this Sunday. It's been rough for Jalen Pitre, so we'll talk about that. But today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now, Cody, as we already alluded to, Jimmy Ward is done for the season. Houston has brought back Kareem Jackson. Kareem Jackson has 2 interceptions on the year. He also has 6 games of suspensions under his belt for some of these hits he's been playing. I mean, he's been laying in the NFL. He's been playing a lot of 2002 ball, that safety position. But he's a familiar face for the Houston Texans. As we know, he started his career, with the Texans back in the 2010s. And we're looking at Jimmy Ward. And I think that before we talk about Jimmy Ward, and I pass it off to you, Cody, when I look at Kareem Jackson here, he's going to be a support system for the guy we're going to close off the show for, and that's Jalen Pitre, right? I think that he's a guy that understands the type of defense that D'Amico Ryan wants. He's going to be a safety valve for this defense. I don't know if Houston will play him a lot of snaps. And I'm not also sure that he won't take away from Pitre's snaps at time, because remember, the Texans did sign Adrian Amos. So in terms of snaps and who he's going to fill in for, we can all assume Jimmy Ward. But again, with the benching of Jalen Pitre, I'm not sure how much trust they have in him as of right now, especially back deep in coverage right now. He's been struggling all year. I thought that he had a very good game 2 games ago against the Tennessee Titans, where he made a couple of pass breakups. But the Sunday's matchup versus the Cleveland Browns, that wasn't a good outing. Wasn't a good outing for Jimmy Ward as well. And so I think that bringing in Kareem, it's a corresponding move to Jimmy Ward going down for the season. It's a corresponding move for benching Jalen Pitre. I want to say Green so bad. For benching Jalen Pitre. It's a corresponding move to give this team some depth at that position. But I also do want to look at the possibility of, and of course I'm moving ahead and looking in the future, just how impactful Kareem Jackson can be for Jalen Pitre. Because when Jackson first got into the league, he had some of the same issues in terms of coverage, in terms of, whether or not he can be trusted back deep as a safety. And we saw Kareem Jackson really come to his own when he started to play some of this down-the-box safety nickel style of football for that position coming out of Alabama. And so I think that regardless of what we saw from Jimmy Ward, has an interception this year. I think he has 2 forced fumbles, has a bevy of tackles. I'm not sure how much of a mentor he could have been to Jalen Pitre and Cody. You know more about it than I do. You're in the locker room all the time, so I'm not sure that if he was a guy that was, hey, listen, taking under the wing type of deal. Maybe I can't vouch for it, but I do see Kareem Jackson as a better mentor for Jalen Pitre because of similar play styles, similar early issues as we're seeing in year 2 for Jalen Pitre. Kareem Jackson had some of these issues when he was first in the NFL, and he cleaned it up and got better, which is why he has a 13-year career. And I think that's more of he can be more relatable to Pitre at this point of his career and kind of give him some game on what helped me become a better player in the NFL.
I might be looking at this a little bit too much, and I'm not gonna lie. Maybe it's because Kareem Jackson was one of my favorite players from back in the day. By the way, he was also teammates with Coach D'Amico Ryan, so I cannot wait to see what he has to say. Hopefully later on today or tomorrow, what he has to say in terms of reunited with D'Amico, but this time with D'Amico being your head coach.
That's crazy. D'Amico still looks like he can play football, right? I mean, of course, he may need like a few months of, training and maybe bulking up a little bit, but for your teammate to now be your head coach and, back in the city of Houston, the full circle deal, that's crazy. I do love that type of stories, man.
But I will say this. I think Jackson is definitely going to get a lot of snaps. Why? Because Texans, believe it or not, they are still in the race they're still in the playoff race. Understand if the playoffs started today, they will be on the outside looking in. As of right now, the Jags are leading the division. I think Indy, because they have that tiebreaker over the Texans, they will take that final 7th wild card spot, which means the Texans will miss it by literally a thin margin. However, John, they need to win out these last 2 games in order to make the playoffs. And one of the things that they're definitely going to have to do is improve that defensive backfield. Because the one thing that I always gave Jimmy Ward credit for is when he was in the game, there not too many opposing teams had an opportunity to create those big time passing yard plays against the Houston Texans. However, every time Jimmy Ward went out, we saw the Texans struggle in that position. We saw it in the game. What game was that? A few weeks ago when Jimmy Ward was out and they had Jacksonville. Jacksonville had an opportunity to record, I think it was like 3 or 4 plays where Trevor Lawrence completed passes over 30 yards. And we definitely saw what took place Sunday against the Cleveland Browns.
Career day for Amari Cooper.
Don't. I'm starting to feel better. Don't make that up again.
I'm sorry, but since we're on the subject of the secondary, and I gotta say this. That was the worst performance I've seen out of Steven Nelson in a Texans jersey.
Well, give us some slack because he was dealing with, I think, a foot injury early on in the game.
Think, I think early on in that game, he probably should have been pulled, which is why you look at Houston moving on from Shaq Griffin. We saw the Twitter blow up, and I can confirm some of that, special teams things. And he was playing good. Was it the best corner? No, but he was more reliable than D'Angelo Ross. So I don't know why he was lined up one-on-one with Amari Cooper. Sorry for going on this rant, but I thought maybe early on we talked about Case Keenum getting pulled. Steven Nelson was playing lethargic. That 3rd and 1, I think it was a play action to Amari Cooper where he, faked out and routed him back up inside. I didn't see a jam out of him. I didn't see anything physical at the line. I didn't see any of that. And then you look at the pass of Amari Cooper over the top. Jimmy Ward got beat, but I'm like, Steven Nelson, you're right there. And nothing. So we talk about secondary help. This team needs secondary help. And the premature move to move on from Shaq Griffin due to whatever issue he had with Frank Ross, where Twitter was on fire the other night, that could have came, and I think it did, come back to bite Houston in the butt.
Remember, I said I did not like that move only because you don't know how these injury situations are going to play out. Now, granted, I said that using Derek Stingley Jr. as the primary example. However, here we are a couple weeks later, and it's actually Steven Nelson who's battling with a foot injury. But at the same time, to go back to my original point, I think Kareem Jackson is definitely going to get a lot of snaps because at the end of the day, he is still a vital veteran that can boost your secondary, especially what the Houston Texans are struggling with. And since you talked about a lot of Kareem Jackson, man, I just want to highlight Jimmy Ward really quick, man, because I'm not going to lie to you, John, listeners and viewers. I've been very disappointed by the production or lack thereof that we've been getting out of Jimmy Ward. Now, granted, when he's healthy, I consider him one of the Texans' top defensive players. However, the thing is, he was never really healthy. And to see him go down with another injury, a quad injury, that's going to put him on injured reserve, which means unless the Texans make the AFC championship game, his season is likely done. So I don't want to call Jimmy Ward a disappointment. However, on a 1-year deal, I would say I think it would be in the Texans' best interest to explore the market to see what they can do to replace Ward's services, because not only did he have to deal with a lot of injuries, I did not like the pairing between him and Jalen Pitre throughout this whole entire season. That was one of the big things that I thought we were definitely going to get in terms of what Jimmy Ward can bring to this team. I get it. It's unfortunate. You know me, I give a lot of passes, especially for injuries, but the fact that this has been a constant theme over and over and over again. As a matter of fact, the last 2 games, he didn't even finish because the game against Tennessee, he went out with the concussion. Then he comes back. It's like, okay, Jimmy Ward is back. And within the first 2 defensive drives, he gets hurt. He get hurt again. He's out due to a quad injury. And now, like I mentioned, unless they make the AFC Championship game, which 9 times out of 10 probably would not happen, his season is done.
Yeah. Ward has missed games this year. He's been out with a concussion, as you mentioned, hip injury, hamstring injury, shoulder injury. I'm going to go ahead and say that I believe that this is the last time Jimmy Ward should be in a Texans jersey. And is it disappointing? Yes, it is, simply because what we thought we were going to get. And at times we saw flashes. Like we but it was never for 4 quarters, or it was never for a stretch of games, or of half of a season, a quarter of a season. The injury bug really not only hurt Houston, but it did hurt Jimmy Ward. And I think that at this point, in his stage of his career, his injury history and his age, it makes no sense for Houston to bring him back. And I think that, again, I would trust for the next 2 games Kareem Jackson more than maybe Jalen Pitre and Jimmy Ward, because you just don't know what you're going to get with those guys based off the season we've had. Sending my mom to go see Cedric the Entertainer. That was a Christmas gift of mine. She loves Cedric the Entertainer from way back in the day. Y'all remember from Kings of Comedy, one of the greatest stand-ups we've seen in our lifetime. She's always loved Cedric the Entertainer. Where did I get my tickets? I got it from Game Time. Did I worry? I did not. Was it fast? Yes, it was. Did I get a killer last-minute deal? Yes, I did. And not only with those killer last-minute deals, you got the all-in prices. You got the views from your seat option. You also have the best price guarantee. Listen, Game Time takes the guesswork completely out of buying tickets. They also have these zone deals where you pick a section and Game Time picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. And with the Game Time guarantee, that means you'll get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Wednesday installment of Locked On Texans. I'm glad to say I am feeling better. However, I hope there's another guy in the city of Houston that's feeling better. Later on today, we will get an opportunity to see if CJ Stroud has clear concussion protocol, which means he will return to practice today. Continue here with this Wednesday installment, man. We got to touch on it really quick. Damian Pierce, it seems like the Texans actually found a new role for him. For those of you guys who missed it, in Sunday's loss against the Cleveland Browns, he gave the Texans arguably, if not their only highlight of the game, with a 98-yard kick return. And I'm not going to lie, it was surprising to see DP back there. And I'm hoping that this wasn't just a one-time thing. Coach D'Amico Ryans did say on Sunday after the game that this was something that they have been experimenting with over the last couple of weeks. But leading up to the game against Cleveland, they really started practicing a little bit more and a little bit more. And now we saw the results of it. I think Damian Pierce finished that game with 160 yards in kick return, somewhere along those lines. Of course, he gave this team their second kick return touchdown of the season. And John, if this is Damian Pierce's new role, I'm all for it. Why? Because it all has to go back to his run scheme, his ability, his attribute of how he liked to run the football. You always talk about how there are too many moments where he tried to create the contact. I think his run scheme is very beneficial to give this team a boost in the special team unit. Now, just think about it, John, listeners and viewers. Let's just think of a pretty healthy Texans team on the offensive side of the ball with CJ Stroud. You already know that's a good, about 20 to 21 points per game. Now, if you give Damian Pierce the ability to return kicks, even if he doesn't score, we saw on Sunday, he would definitely put you in great field position. I like it, and I think this is going to be a fresh start for our guy DP.
Yeah, I love it for him, and I love that Houston found a way to get him on the field. This is what Damian Pierce said. This offense is requiring a version of me that I haven't attained yet. So I think that when we look at the difference between rookie year and this year, the system has not necessarily, it hasn't been in the favor of Damian Pierce, and Damian Pierce's running style hasn't been in favor of the system. But he is a guy that I've come on the show multiple times and I've said, well, running the ball right now isn't the best for Damian Pierce. But I would love to see him maybe get some more passing opportunities, because I do believe still once he makes it to the second level, he's very hard to bring down. Then you see his running style kick in. So it goes back early in the year where he caught that screen pass and he was able to get to the second level. And I think that was maybe until Sunday his biggest play of the year. It was about maybe 30 to 40 yards on the screen on the screen pass. And so I like that. First of all, I like that we're not seeing Robert Woods back there. I like that there is an opportunity and a role created for him because he still has some talent, right? A lot of people think that we're just completely off the Damian Pierce train. No, we're not. We're off the forcing something when it's not working train. Damian Pierce hasn't been working as the lead back for Houston. Damian Pierce has not been working as the relief back for Houston. But he's still on the roster, and he's still a guy that can make some moves once he's in space. And so you go back to that 98-yard TD from a return game on Sunday, and he hasn't returned kicks since high school, which is crazy. And so shout out to DP. But that's just a coaching staff figuring out a way to get a young man involved. That's also a coaching staff figuring out a way to get a young man some more confidence back while he's on the field. Because I don't believe he was as confident as we saw him be last year, this year, due to his productivity or lack thereof. So overall, I'm looking at Damian Pierce returning kicks as a new role that I like. Maybe this should have been something that he should have gotten more opportunity for earlier this year in terms of punt returns and kick returns. But Cody, to your point, We'll see how impactful, because I'm not expecting for him to return kicks to the house the next 2 games, right? That
He
rarely
might.
happens.
He
It
might.
might, but everybody ain't Devin Hester. Well,
Mm.
everybody ain't Cordell Patterson. Everybody ain't my man from the Browns, Josh Cribbs. Everybody ain't that. But what I do like is shortening the field for an offense that even
Mm-hmm.
with CJ Stroud has been struggling. So let's say some of these kick returns, instead of 25 yards, if he just waves it out and that's where Houston starts, let's say Damian Pierce can, pick up and get it to the 35, right? Maybe the 40, right? Well, I know there's a lot of possibilities. We could say the other, we could say whatever number line, yard line, but can he help this offense in a way that he hasn't been able to help this offense all year? And that's field position. And if you can do that, if you can shorten that field, now you're looking at Houston having an opportunity to come away with at least maybe 3. You want 7, but maybe 3, because they're able to kick the field goal with Kareem Fairbairn back. So that's huge. And I do like that move, man. And shout out to the coaching staff for not giving up on Damian Pierce. Shout out to that coaching staff for taking the initiative to find a way to get him on the field in a way that can be impactful. So, I talked about the beef between Shaq Griffin and Frank Ross, which came out on Sunday. And I think was that Brown Chubby Bear? Was that V that tweeted about Shaq Griffin?
No,
That
I
got the
didn't
exchange going.
see it.
I can't remember who it was, but somebody from Texas Twitter got the exchange going. So shout out to them. But whatever Frank Ross did with Shaq Griffin, he did the opposite with Damian Pierce. He found a way to get a player out on that field, and Damian Pierce committed to it, 98 yards, and that was the first time I've seen him happy all year. So to see that excitement, to see that love from the sideline was phenomenal. Prize Picks is the daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You're not battling thousands of other players. You're not battling pros. You're not battling sharks. It's just you versus the numbers. You pick the more than, less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Do you believe Christian McCaffrey is going to get more than 75 rushing yards? Or is Patrick Mahomes going to throw for more than 2 passing TDs? You pick the more than or less than on that. Do you want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Millie, or comedian Andrew Schultz? You can now find community plays under the promo tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy, though, so that if your entries stay in play, even if one of your players get injured. That actually helped me out the other day with Jimmy Butler. So shout out to Prize Picks, because I won some money because of that. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second half, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy. You cannot go wrong with that. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL or download the app to your phone. Use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Before we close out today's show, went to the Rockets game Tuesday night. Didn't see Jalen Green in the entire fourth quarter.
For like the third straight game, I think.
Yeah, I think he was taking out the 5-minute mark in the third quarter.
Yep.
And didn't see him after that. Sunday, Jaden Pitre, he was benched. So Houston has a benching problem with their Jalen's and Houston have a benching problem with their franchises. But Jalen Pitre being benched, Cody, what are your thoughts?
I'm stunned, and Coach D'Amico Ryans was asked about it Sunday, and he said he wanted to give other players new opportunities. I call BS on that, because I'm like, you are literally in the midst of a playoff push. Jimmy Ward is out. Other top defensive players are out. You've dealt with several injuries throughout this whole entire season. And once again, I know I've been saying this entire week, but the first 2 defensive series, you lost Jimmy Ward, Jonathan Gennard, and Steven Nelson. Even though Steven Nelson came back, John, to your point, I want to give him a pass due to the foot injury that he was battling with, but he was not looking like himself. I don't understand how you look at all of that and say, you know what, I want to take out, and I hate to say this now, but one of my up and coming best defensive young players to give other people a new opportunity. I call BS on that, man. And look, I understand it. I get it. And you guys know I've always been a pretty big fan of Jalen Pitre and Jalen Green. And, you know, I'm going to miss Jalen Green because the trade deadline coming up in a couple weeks. And I won't be surprised if he won't be here no more. But that's another story, another show for another topic. Please go out. Please be sure to check out our colleague Jackson Gatlin over at Locked On Rockets for that information. But you know, to go back to Jalen Pitre, man, this whole entire 2023 season has been disappointing. You know, this was a guy. This was a guy. When you go back and you take a look at how bad last year was, he was by far what, top 5 player on that team, and we thought without a shadow of a doubt that Pro Bowls was in his future. All pros were in his future. And I think the number one thing that's most disappointing is I had a lot of hope and expectation that he was definitely going to take at least that Pro Bowl step under Coach DeMeco Ryans. And he has looked like a shell of what we saw throughout his rookie year. I kind of think it's similar to what we saw out of Damian Pierce this whole entire season, to where he's just struggling to get adjusted to a new scheme. And hopefully that's the case. Hopefully, you know, after you go through a whole entire offseason of watching film, you know you're going to have the same coach, same defensive coordinator, same system and all that other stuff. You can work on what you need to work on, and hopefully we get a better version of Jalen Pitre in 2024, man. But I'm not buying the fact that you wanted to give other people new opportunity, and yet you still have something to play for, meaningful football at the end of December.
Really quick, was Jalen dealing with an offseason injury coming into this year?
I don't remember, to be honest with you.
I don't know, but he hasn't looked right all year. Like he hasn't, his burst hasn't been there. His leaping ability hasn't been there. So Jalen has been looking off all year. Going back to,
he had like 5 or 6 interceptions last year. I don't think he had not one this year.
He has none this year. Even at training camp at times, I was looking. I was like, okay, well, he looks good, but he's not looking as fast. He's not looking as athletic as he looked in his rookie year. But I think I'm only going to call BS on that because just say what it is. You want to give other guys opportunities because the guy that you have playing out there right now ain't playing worth the doggone. And I think that's it. I think that's it. Jalen hasn't been cutting it. He cut it. He was cutting it in that Tennessee game, but
that was his best game of the season. And probably the only game where you could say, man, we got some good play from Jalen. Maybe one more, but it ain't been more than 2.
Right, and even in that game, he had to, recover on that pass to DeAndre Hopkins with 40 yards. He knocked that out at the last second, right? So, but that was his best game. I just say, I think, say what it is. And I know that sometimes you cannot, but giving guys other opportunity, giving other guys the opportunity, to me, comes off as I got to get somebody in here that can do what I need for them to do, because the starter right now is not getting it done. And that's plain and simple. And we all got eyes. We're all watching. Some of us got 4 of them, just like Cody and myself. We're watching. And Pitre has been getting beat this year. Pitre his ball skills hasn't been there. He's still struggling with, some of these missed tackles. Unless he's around the line of scrimmage, playing in that box safety, he hasn't looked the best. Even at that little box safety, position, at that role, he hasn't looked the best or the greatest all this year. So I think for DeMeco, he just looking, and him and Matt Burke are probably saying to themselves, we got to find somebody. We got to get somebody in there right now that can help stop this. Now, it didn't happen because, bench Jalen Pitre, but you had Ross on Mark Cooper for one-on-one coverage. But the grand scheme of this season is Jalen Pitre has been a liability in coverage. And even with Kareem Jackson coming in and with Jimmy Ward going out, and now you still got Jalen Pitre and Adrian Amos and Houston Carson. I still look at this secondary for Houston as a liability. And am I worried about it too much against the Tennessee Titans? Maybe not so much. But Ryan Tannehill is back, and we can take that with a grain of salt. But I still believe the season is going to come down to the last game of the year against the Indianapolis Colts. And we saw Gardner Minshew. We saw Desmond Ridder. We saw Trevor Lawrence. We just saw Joe Flacco. We saw some average, below average, mediocre quarterbacks torch this secondary. Gardner Minshew was one of them, and that was when their secondary was playing a little bit better because it was healthier. So now I don't know how much trust the coaching staff. I know I don't. Cody, I don't know about yourself. How much trust do we have in this secondary? And I think when it comes down to the last game of the season, they're going to need a masterclass performance from their front seven to create as much pressure as possible. Because outside of Derek Stingley, I don't know what's going on with Steven Nelson. Shaq Griffin is gone. You still have Desmond King, who's been playing well. But there isn't too many guys in their secondary that I trust to make plays consistently through 4 quarters. Thank you guys for listening to today's episode. Be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans and follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, it's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.